Player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Tifa character review. Brand new to Global today, alongside Cloud as part of the Final Fantasy VII Advent Children collaboration. And so, ready to get into the character review. It's going to be the character overview, the total stat analysis. We'll look at the report card where we kind of summarize those stats in the context of what I know in the rest of her kit. We'll do a quick new player snapshot, some general thoughts rounding out some of my more higher level ideas and walking through some of the math of certain things. Passives, counters, job abilities, auto priority. We'll look at her TMR, the job-based vision card eligibility, some general optimization pieces for what to build around her, 2 different sample builds, and then finalizing things with some Truststone recommendations. And so, kicking things off here, the character overview. Brand new ice unit added here to Global. They've given her the unique main job of Zangan-style fighter with Lancer and Pugilist as the subjobs. She does equip fists and cloths, hats, and accessories. She got a move of 3 and a jump of 2 as a 90 cost unit, and I do recommend 50 faith for her. You could go higher for some of the frostbite effects that we'll get into, but I have concerns about that. We'll talk about that soon. Now, her max range on the job is 5 squares away. She does have 2 AoE abilities and 2 single target scaling abilities. From a resistance perspective, 15% to slash and magic, 10% to pierce, 0 to strike, and negative 10% to missile being her only negative weakness there. From an ailment perspective, 50% to both poison and charm, and the 10% to sleep. The sleep one's nice to kind of have that little bit extra in there. There is still sleep around. You know, King Mon's counter ability, obviously Helen of the Black Rose comes up, but even older characters might catch you off guard. But the poison one certainly is nice. But as a 50 faith unit, not terribly concerned about these. The mastery ability, they gave her 15 unit res only on that mastery ability. The dream ability is 15 healing power and 20 accuracy permanently, makes her a very hyper accurate unit, as we will see very shortly here. Now, for the stat overview, you know, base stats, she is right there with almost all the other 4th anniversary units. That base HP is exceptionally high in this new category where most of these units land up. Does have enormous ramifications on what her total HP ends up being, as we'll see in the sample builds. The base attack also very strong here. Now, it's not in the same category as some of these other units, but 432 is right there among the top of what you can get to. Overall, I don't think it's a huge downgrade for her. Attack is only one small component of total damage output. So overall, I think her attack still ends up in a relatively good spot, as we'll end up seeing. The base agility, pretty much, you know, that 25th percentile, but you're talking about 1 or 2 agility points. I don't think 56 is anything to be concerned about. She's not a crazy fast character, but she's definitely a faster than average character. I'm pretty happy where her agility ends up. The base dexterity, this is one of her other strong points here. A very strong base dexterity and lots of other ways to get her critical hit rate up. She's definitely way above the average, way above the 75th percentile in terms of where her base dexterity gets to. We'll see how that shakes out in the rest of the kit soon. The base luck also very much above average. Now, not to the degree that some of the other units are. A lot of these 4th anniversary units are in that 190 to 200 range, but she has a high enough base luck stat with an exceptional vision card that's coming for her next week that will really amplify her total luck stat. So this is a nice place to be. When we transition those charts kind of into this one here showing her where she lands up relative compared to all the other units. Again, I'm really not concerned with where any of these base stats end up. Even total stats, once you start integrating the board nodes, the mastery, things of that nature, ends up at a very strong overall place to be. The interesting thing here, though, is that on the board nodes, they typically give some kind of percent to a primary stat, and it's like in 99% of the cases, HP or attack, if you're an attacker. They gave her dexterity as a percent on the board nodes, which does greatly help her overall crit hit rate, a little bit for the accuracy. Before I hype this up too much, though, I'd like to share with you the list of units that also have board node percent. And obviously, I'm not saying there's a trend or a pattern here, but it's kind of hard to ignore. The other units that have the dex percent node in the game, this is the entire list, it's Prompto, Frederica, Corwell, Cecil, Barrett, and Aerith. So do what you will with that sample of units where Gumi decided this was the approach they were going to take with the board node. Tifa's got it. It's actually nice for her. I don't like this list, though. But the agility, when we get into things here, she does have a passive that can increase her agility first and foremost when you include the 15 and 8% main and sub-slot vision cards. Overall, I'm pretty happy where she ends up. She's relatively in line with all the other units with no passives equipped. When she can equip that passive, she does end up in that higher tier of units overall for where the agility ends up. I think that's a big thumbs up. The crit hit and crit avoid, overall crit hit rate is definitely above where many characters end up. The dexterity certainly helps. There are a couple passives though that she has that will greatly amplify the crit hit rate, which I'm not including here at the moment, but we'll talk about those in the passive section, where I think you'll likely have one of them active at all times. So this is actually a little bit higher than the graph implies, but definitely a good spot to be in. The crit avoidance rate, again, this is kind of in line with most other units. 60% is nothing crazy. Overall, not the worst. Now for accuracy, brand new bar set in the game. She is the most accurate unit in the game by far and away. This dot is literally her by herself, and everyone else is like a whole tier below her. It's an S tier level of accuracy that she brings to the table. She does have passives that can also increase the accuracy, so she gets relatively better in that regard as well. She has two different passives that can for accuracy. I actually only have her for one here on this chart. If I had her equip that second one, she'd actually be at this 250 mark, like a full, 25% higher than the next highest, most accurate unit in the game. It's absolutely bonkers how accurate she can get if you decide to go that way. Now, the evasion, maybe a little bit less than what we're used to overall. The luck scaling equips here are okay, and her vision card certainly will give her a lot of luck. That's coming next week. So this is a decent enough spot to be. Strike and ice really aren't tuned for the top tier min-maxing evade potential. So I don't really think she has that capability personally, but she will end up with a very nice luck stat because of her vision card. Now for the report card, overall effective HP here, I'm going with a B. No defense, no spirit, no AoE res, only 15 unit res. Her overall HP stat is fine. It's not as competitive with some of the other units that we've seen as of late. Her innate resistances are okay. She's actually a little bit lower than some on like the slash res and the magic res. It's not a ton, but all these factors kind of add up. It's honestly not bad, but compared to some of the 4th anniversary units, it ends up being a step back in terms of effective HP. The survivability, I'm going with a C plus here personally. She does have a 50 physical damage barrier, 40 elemental chain res, which we're not really valuing all that highly. We've never really seen it to be a majorly impactful source of damage mitigation. It can be in certain matchups, but like general applicability, not all that great. She does have a absorb 50% damage done, and her 15 healing power will actually, at minimum 15 healing power, will actually make that a 65% absorption of all damage that she does for those 3 turns. She is courage capable, and she does have some AP reduction mechanics, which means less enemy damage uptime, which means less damage received, which is kind of a component of survivability. So there are a couple things here, but it is relatively bare bones compared to what most other units have. It's not fantastic in the 4th anniversary of things. Now the damage output, this one's a tough one. I'm going with a B- personally. The strike res pen is variable. It can be good. It can also be very poor. The defense pen is suspect. I'm actually not that concerned about it though. I think I should delete that line. Quick edit, and so I will. The defense pen is fine. That's the adjective I'll use. The attack stat is good. I'm not blown away by her innately in some of these builds. The 60% unit crush that she brings, though, obviously is amazing, but it actually kind of benefits her teammates more than her in some instances. We'll talk about that soon. Not a big chainer for PvP either, so I know a lot of these strike units kind of accumulate some chains, and she's not really part of that per se. We'll look at that more soon. The agility, I'm happy with a B- here. She said 80 versus the 78 average without that passive. Should you equip the passive, it's 86 versus 81, and I think you'll have it on almost all the time, so I'm pretty comfortable with the agility, maybe a B instead of a B-. The accuracy, though, is an S. There's no guaranteed hit, but she's literally in her own tier above everybody else in the game. It's pretty significant how that much of a strength that is for her. The evasion is a C+ here. Ice and Strike isn't tuned for it, so I'm kind of tempering expectations here, and she's on the lower end of it anyway compared to where other units have been, so it's kind of there, but not really. The movement that was a B, Jump 2 has proven to be very nice in a lot of these maps. Whether those maps stick around in terms of having some like height barriers that people need to jump over to buff and get to our teammates remains to be seen, but Jump 2 certainly has shown how valuable it can be. The auto ease of use for me, I'm going with a C+ here. Now here's the thing, the buff AI is very straightforward, but I think the attack AI is very variable. We're going to talk about that in the main job section, which is one of my biggest concerns about her. I also think that Strike is kind of in this like new era where a lot of the strike units, the balance has changed for them. And although she's a good unit, that type of character is finding it difficult in the current meantime. So I think you might have difficulty making her shine, if that makes sense, which for me, the game disruption translates to a C as well. She's a fan favorite, so people are going to pull her. People are going to build her. She's free, technically, so you start off on a good note there. Ice as an element is great right now, though, but Strike is in a huge decline, and even Ice will see a little bit of counterplay here with Sephiroth's release in terms of who can counter her. I don't really think she's going to do anything to shake up any of the game. Now for the passives, I'm going with a B here. honestly, very good passives, but not fourth anniversary good. It's not a bad thing. B is totally acceptable, but nothing that blows you away. But they certainly are very good, very flexible for a variety of instances where you want to use them. The counter abilities, I'm going with a B minus. It's a preemptive attack. It's honestly nice. It is nothing really special. I think it's fair. The overall drop in kit for me, C plus here. The abilities are spread too thin personally. The buffs are honestly kind of subpar again comparing to where the bar is. And to me, straight up, I don't think the limit break is good. I actually would likely turn off the limit break, and we'll talk about that soon. The final grade for me is a B. Now, she's a nice upgrade to strike variations, and I say that because many of the things that made strike oppressive for so long are kind of subsiding. She's a very solid ice addition, though. Her AP approach in terms of like reducing enemy AP is good, but I think it's more good in like theory craft, not really in practice. We've done a bunch of stress testing of AP as of late with like the Roy Mustang TMRs, and there are units that already do have frostbite that we've done some testing with, and the impact is fine, but at the end of the day, like the Wind Veritas TMR is far more effective than any of those. It's not bad. It's not oppressive though. But that brings us to the new player thoughts. And this isn't a pull verdict because you get it for free. This is a build verdict. And honestly, for me, it's a thumbs down. Now, here's the thing. The ice permanent pool units, they're not awful, but they're not going to carry you for long here. These units are quickly starting to show some of their age and power creep. I will say, though, the ice vision cards are positively exceptional. I mean, they're candidates for the best in the game. Even if they're a little bit rarer for a new player to get, like, all of them, you have 4 different Dark Espers here for ice, and you'll see in the sample builds, it is a significant difference that these can make for your ice team. When we look at the Fist permanent pool, really just carried by Bridal Alaya. Everything else was limited in terms of very strong strike units. So if you haven't already invested in strike, you've unfortunately been a little bit late to the party. The best strike vision cards were also limited. The ones that are in the permanent pool really aren't terrible, but they're not exceptional either. So for new player, I think you might have missed some of that, and I'm not 100% positive Tifa is the future of it either. But yeah, ice, generally speaking, isn't a bad element, but most of their best current units are limited. A2 and Aldoa specifically, they typically do rely on the water-earth overlap that the Dark Espers offer. So ice is more than just itself. It does have some dual element synergy. So this is only one part of the conversation, but that can also be kind of rare and expensive if you're now investing into multiple elements, if you know what I mean. Now, the strike units, very underwhelming in the permanent pool. Again, I think I'm being repetitive here. The Tifa vision card in 2 weeks, though, is an S-tier vision card that you should absolutely pull. It's going to have very, very long-lasting power for a variety of different teams, strike included, should there be another good strike upsurge somewhere for balance reasons. But yeah, for me, I think the resources are better allocated elsewhere in terms of using your Vizior to acquire Tifa shards. I don't think it's a good investment, and the Ice Gilgamesh unit coming in a couple weeks, I think, is far superior to her. So if you have to pull an Ice unit sometime soon and build one, Gilgamesh is probably the guy. Now, for the general thoughts, I say the strike penetrations are variable in the sense that she's got no innate strike res pen. She does get 20% on her new vision card. That's enormous, number one. 10% from a Truststone passive puts her at 30% permanently for the uptime. That's actually not that bad. I'm pretty happy with that, but that's obviously reliant on the vision card. You do get 30% on the buff, but buffs can be dispelled, and quite often are nowadays, so that penetration can be gone rather quickly. She does also have a minus 15% strike resistance on hit. The problem I have with that is we've seen it with the High Dragoon for the Pierce job, that same kind of imperil on hit, and honestly the damage has not been substantial for Pierce teams, so I'm kind of using that comparison for strike teams. That I think it's nice in that it'll obviously reduce overall the need for strike res pen if you can reduce everyone's strike resistance by 15% all the time, but I don't think it's got any real like nuking offensive power that you kind of hope for in a unit. Now, the defense pen, though, is good enough for me. 40 on passive. You do get 40 as part of an ability, but it's not on her unit crush ability. One of the major problems I have, again, we'll talk about that soon. 10 from a Truststone passive. You could get 20 from Ultros. There's a lot of different ways to get that defense pen. I think she's fine from that regard. I am very concerned about her survivability, though. Very reliant on the damage absorbed. She does have some self-heal potential for second fights on some personal self-heal buffs. We'll talk about that soon, but I think Fist is trending downward relatively fast. I don't think she does anything to really bring them back up at all. But she does add some very nice things to strike teams if that is where you already play at. That 60% unit crush certainly synergizes. That 30% strike res pen is a teammate buff as well, so you can pass that onto teammates, certainly nice. And the 15% impair helps them as well. She is technically another barrier breaker to throw in the fold. Hers is AoE. The other barrier breakers like 2P and Ketone are single target, so kind of different in what they bring. So it's just a different version of it. And the element chain res kind of stacks with Ketone's for her weapon, because Tifa can give elemental chain res to teammates. Ketone's weapon gives elemental chain res, which is totally random, even to this day. So I guess like maybe that stacking together means something, but I really don't think it means all that much. Now, unfortunately, I do think her AP reduction angle is duplicative at the moment. The Wind Veritas Timar is just 10 times better at it. But Cloud, Ashen King Mont, Kadaj all technically have some remove AP restore in their kit. The new Gilgamesh coming out in a couple weeks also has the Frostbite effect on limit break, so I like it. I don't love it. The Unit Crush is certainly great, but it seems more for her team than it does for herself. Two of her other like main abilities to likely be used more often than not are AoE in nature, so that Unit Res and Peril isn't exactly the same as Ashen King Mont, where he's got a couple different kinds of select 2s, and his limit break has the follow-up attack, which greatly is enhanced by the Unit Crush. Like, hers doesn't really synergize in her kit the same way, so the impact's more for the team than for her, which is fine, quite honestly. And relatively decent AP management, honestly, but not immune to the anti-AP angle that we're seeing right now in the game either. She does have 15% reduced consumption on her weapon. Her AP skills are relatively cheap. None are more expensive than 30. There's no Frostbite resistance for herself for any of these like mirror matchups or potential Frostbite users. And there's no counterplay for other AP reduction measures either. I don't hate Dark Shiva on her, which we'll talk about soon, because Dark Shiva does have some initial AP. That is in one of my sample builds, but we'll keep moving along here. The passive abilities, again, all of these actually are relatively good by themselves, but they're just not like 4th anniversary crazy good. To me, the Zengen's Teachings Sharp Attack is a very, very good one. I honestly think it's interchangeable with the Ultimate Secret. They both give 25 crit rate. It's just a question whether or not you want the accuracy or whether you want the attack percent. If you don't need the accuracy, go with the attack percent. But I do think the quick attack is always necessary. That's the 12% agility, the 40 defense pen. Obviously, the enhanced continuous attack here is that extra accuracy, but I think that's a little bit redundant. Quite frankly, I think you only need one of the two passives from an accuracy perspective. So some to pick and choose from. They're not bad, but they're not 4th anniversary stacked to the gills, if you know what I mean. The counter abilities, this is a preemptive ability that will do 30% chance to proc. It's a double hit, 121% mod of strike damage. It's fine. I'm not unhappy with this, but I don't think game-changing. It's some nice chip damage to add into the fold. We look at the main job buffs. This is where things take a small power creep step back. You know, it's a 50% physical barrier, 40 elemental chain res, the 30 strike res pen, and absorbs 50% of the damage for 4 turns. These are all 4 turns. So again, that's at least in line with the current power creep, that it's a turn longer, but the fact that I can read this in one breath means it's a weak buff compared to other units. That's kind of a joke. That's not actually a serious analysis. But she, on her second buff here, has Courage, and that's where that Strike in Peril of 15% also comes from. These are okay. They're not bad. They're not game-changing, though. The main job offensive abilities, she does scale off 100% of her attack stat, and then 30% dex and 20% luck and agility. These are 4 strike scaling, ice scaling attacks. Range-wise, again, you have these 2 AoE cross shapes. You also have a select 2 that's the Unit Crush. This is where I think I have the biggest problem. I like everything on all 3 of these bottom abilities. Even the top ability, the decrease AP of 20, is fantastic. I wish they consolidated some of them. The fact that they're spread out across 4 different places, I think, is a bad thing, because if you walk into a fight, if the enemies have barriers, well, you're going to use the barrier break, and while that sounds good, that means you're not getting your defense pen for another turn, or it means you're not doing the Imperil, which also has the reduced counter chance, which has the whole Frostbite thing, and so there's so many, like, weird AI things from, like, a damage min-maxing perspective here, from, like, where the enemies are standing to what you're using, that I don't think any one of these abilities is, like, amazing on their own, and I have some concerns on how the AI will functionally use them to like best dish out the damage. So yeah, I don't love it. The limit break here, I'll be honest, I don't like this limit break. I would turn this off personally. I don't think this does anything to like supplement her main job here. It's a decrease of chain res of 50. It is a nice modifier. It is a double hit. It's a decrease of crit evade of 30% for 3 turns. It's okay, but the problem I have is I don't want her walking onto the battlefield, using this first, then using a barrier break, then 3 turns in, she finally uses the Frostbite. Like, your fight's over by the time that happens. Do you know what I mean? So, like, I don't love what this limit break does for anything in the opening fight or the mid fight, I don't think it just does much value for what she tries to do. The sub job here, this is where you get some of that self heal potentially on like a second Guild War fight, that she can restore 40% of her HP. The healing power is there. This is a very good self heal buff for any kind of opportunities where she can use it. The Palm Rush, not bad either as a triple hit, but it's a much lower modifier. The crit chance is nice. I actually don't hate the sub job. I do give it a thumbs up. And honestly, I think it might be my favorite of the jobs because the Lancer sub job, sure, there's a 100% hit chance here, but she doesn't really need it if you're building her properly. The buff here is fine. I don't know if it's better than the main job. The Pierce type attacks are fine. It's nice to have another attack type in her kit, but I'm not blown away by this. And then Pugilist, this job has shown its age as well. The restorative technique of the 30% healing is nice, but it's kind of duplicative with their main sub job. And honestly, I'd rather just have the main sub job than the Pugilist, which I think that's why the Zangan Martial Artist is my favorite. Now we get to the TMR review. It's a cloth type, not bad. One agility is actually kind of cool here for some PvE min-maxing with turn orders where it adds another kind of TMR with some agility factor to it. So that's kind of cool. The TMR skill itself, I don't love it for Tifa. I don't think she needs it. But for some of these older strike units that do not have the innate strike res pen, this actually is a pretty nice addition to the game. I don't think it's game changing, but the fact that they finally gave an option for some of those units certainly is nice. At least the ones that can equip cloths by and large. Now for the job-based vision cards, Strike was eating good for a long time with the job overlaps. It still kind of is. Spear and Greatsword and Mace are still three of their overall better ones, but Mace is definitely taking a step back in the meta. Spear kind of has too. The bones for Staff Black Mage and Staff Devout are certainly there too, but as we've also seen, both of those magic-oriented types are still fine, but also kind of taking a step back at the moment. So I don't see a ton here with Strike to synergize, not only with itself, but even outside of itself. So it's there, the bones are there, it's not a bad investment, but it's not nearly as impressive as it once was. Now for the unique equipment, she has a weapon and the TOR item in a couple weeks here. The weapon is honestly great. 15 crit damage, 15 AP consumption down for all her abilities. This also is upon critical hit, reducing the enemy's AP by another 5, and its strike attack 15. I actually like this weapon a lot. I don't see any reason to use anything else, quite frankly. The cell phone is fine. This is another free accuracy of 20, unit res of 10, human killer 20. I don't think it's best in slot for her, though, because I think I'd rather bulk her up a little bit, but I don't hate this one either. And for the general optimization, I think the Dragon Claws are really the only other consideration you'd have. They do have an effect that amplifies your damage when your health falls below a certain threshold, and since she has a self-heal, that actually might help her a lot if she falls below that threshold. But whether it's better or not better than the decreased AP consumption and the AP on hit, I don't think so, but both are certainly competitive options. For the other equips, I think I'm sticking with the survival vest, quite honestly, but the power sash is actually kind of an interesting item to consider for the defense pen, but that has not ever really been a popular piece of gear. I honestly think you're likely fine going with that cell phone or the Genji glove or the pod accessories. And from the Esper perspective, pretty standard Espers, but I think Dark Shiva is a legitimately good Esper for her, where sure, it's a magic Esper, but we'll dispel that notion in a second. Overall, 19 agility here, brings a lot in terms of the 25 ice attack. You get 5 AoE res. Initial 10 AP is really what I like about this, that you give her some of that extra AP to help fight some of the AP shenanigans that are going on at the moment. You get her that extra crit rate, which she certainly loves. The stop res innately is certainly nice for the uptick in Summer Glaciellas that we've seen, where Summer Glaciella has a stop attack that she'll spam pretty consistently. Overall, I actually like a lot of what this Esper has to bring, and when we do the mono ice build, I'm using Dark Shiva here, and this mono ice build I actually like a lot. I think this probably is her best build, quite frankly, where this is the power of all the dark espers that you're seeing. I have 4 dark espers, and certainly you could flex some of these items. I have the survival vest. I used the passives I recommended. I'm using defense and agility set for her. Against the defense set with that healing power should help her with how much damage she absorbs, but stat wise, north of 12,000 HP, almost 19,000 attack stat, 120 agility here. Certainly very nice because of what I have on her for the vision cards. Now you're looking at 51 unit res, 25 AoE res. She's got no reaction block rate in this build, which not amazing. You like to see a little bit of reaction block rate, but most of the strongest reaction counters right now are for slash damage, not for strike damage, people. So maybe less of a priority for her than it is some of the slash attackers that we've seen as of late. Other than that, though, the modifiers here are okay. 90 ice attack, 15 strike attack, 30 human killer. It's not oppressively strong, but could be worse, I guess. 56 defense pen, only 10 strike res pen innately, 35 healing power. The effective HP here is fine. It's not overpowering. This build, I think, is probably one of the best builds that you could probably put her in, because when you look at the strike team, I'm not in love with this, and I purposely built this using the JP builder to use her vision card here, because I think this vision card is best in slot for her in many iterations of what you'd run. A couple noticeable things: takes a big hit on the HP side here, not having the elemental mastery with the other ice units. The attack takes a significant drop down here, agility down to 114. Her accuracy and evasion significantly higher because of that vision card. So that's certainly a big thing to consider. You're still at roughly the same resistances, a little more reaction block rate. The modifiers are worse, all things considered, a little bit weaker in that regard. You do get to 30 strike res pen instead of the 10. I like that. 25% debuff weakening, but the effective HP falls rather substantially here in this build comparatively. And so I'm not a huge fan of the strike team. I think it's still serviceable in certain kinds of ranks, but I don't think it has nearly the power that it used to be in any capacity. And finally, the Truststones. I think defense and spirit on the left side are best, just because her heal as part of the damage absorb is such an important part of her survivability that I would want to get as much damage back as I can. Pretty standard recommendations on the left side for HP, luck, and the element res. The right side, agility. The aim is probably overkill, quite honestly, but I think agility is fine. Attack 20%, defense pen 10. Strike res pen 10, I definitely want to have on there. The ice attack 10, you could probably sub out. Same with the dexterity of 15%, since she already has so much innately. You definitely want the healing power 10. The only thing I'm considering is maybe putting in that reaction block of 20, whereas we saw in that mono ice build, none innately. Would be kind of nice to have 20 from there, so you can probably flex a couple of these. But that's the Tifa review altogether. Again, this is a character, it's really not a bad character in the broad scheme of the game. When you put her against a majority of these second and third anniversary units, yeah, she's going to kick the crap out of them. But from a fourth anniversary and beyond standard, from not only present day but the foreseeable future, I don't see a ton of upside for her, because I just see a lot of flaws in counterplay that I think can be easily exposed. But that's my thoughts for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. Good luck pulling on the rest of the banners for the Advent Children collaboration, and I'll see y'all later.